Was Moby Dick behind 9/11? I do fear that the heaviest blow ever dealt at liberty will be dealt by this country. Americans can't bear to be told of their faults. Charles Dickens, American Notes, London, Chapman and Hall, 1842. The United States is the leading terrorist state. Noam Chomsky. Though man loved his fellow, yet man is a money-making animal, which propensity too often interferes with his benevolence. Herman Melville, Moby Dick. The all-American archetype, Captain Ahab of the Pequod, scours the world's oceans in search of whales, and sighting his prey with its 7 tons of valuable oil, the avid hunter vibrates with excitement. That the whale, whose territory Ahab's invading, is innocent, is irrelevant to Ahab, a religious fanatic. Instead, he demonizes his quarry, whom he calls Moby Dick, whenever the whale puts up a resistance. Towards thee I roll, thou all-destroying but unconquering whale. Ahab bawls out biblically at this creature below the surface. To the last I grapple with thee. From hell's heart I stab at thee. For hate's sake, he raves, I spit my last breath at thee. The deluded Ahab projects all the world's evils onto the whale to provide himself with an excuse to kill it and steal its oil. He repeatedly orders it to be targeted by the Pequod's harpooners, only to be outraged when it thrashes his ship with its tail. To Ahab, it's that hated fish, and to Starbuck, his sidekick, it's a devil. To another man, Flask, it's a species of magnified water rat. They've decked out the Pequod with teeth and bones from previous catches to steer their imperious death ship with a whalebone tiller. The Pequod's more of a floating Walmart than a romantic backdrop, as everyone on board is on rock-bottom wages, whilst the profits from whale oil are, for the ship's absent owners, a sea story presaging an empire's signature crime. When Moby Dick's oil for industrialization, lighting, and lubrication is made obsolete by Rockefeller's Standard Oil, the same criminality as Ahab's would attend the extraction of crude. The same bloodshed would stain U.S. petrodollars. For the U.S. oil corporations and their compliant Congress work similarly to the armed and scavenging whaler. Hell-bent on their capturing the fuel resources of the world, they decry all opposition as an axis of evil. Since 65% of the world's oil is beneath Muslim lands, a resource war requires Islam's demonization. If the oil lay on Buddhist regions, Buddha would be evil. The U.S. has only 2% of the oil it lusts after. A U.S. general, William Looney, has imperiously stated, Iraqis know we own their country. It's a good thing, especially when there's a lot of oil that the United States needs. Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, is less brazen, but his admission is the same. I am saddened that it is politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everyone knows. The Iraq War is largely about oil. Each White House Captain Ahab is tasked with acquiring black gold, the oil that fuels the American dream. He's rewarded for ensuring that the U.S. ship of state runs on cheap gas, even though its cost is unwarranted wars. In a slip of the tongue in 1973, President Richard M. Nixon, responding to a current gasoline shortage, announced, "By 1980, we will be self-sufficient and will not need to rely on foreign energy." A Vice President, Richard Cheney, boldly stated that by 2010 we will need an additional 50 million barrels a day. The Middle East, with 2/3 of the oil and the lowest cost, is where the prize lies, and through war he'd snatch it. Our airstrikes were the most effective yet humane in the history of warfare, President George W. Bush crassly boasted in 1991, and patting Bush's back, Clinton later added, "The U.S. bombing of Iraq in retaliation from the Iraqi plot to assassinate former President George Bush was essential," said Clinton, "to affirm the expectation of civilized behavior among nations." However, the mother of a dead GI, Susan Niederer, would ask one First Lady, Laura Bush, "If this war is so righteous," she challenged, "why don't you send your own children?" Mrs. Bush refused to respond. And in March 2003, the London Times revealed U.S. blatancy by quoting a U.S. Marine sharpshooter. During Baghdad's invasion, he described his civilized behavior. "We had a great day. We killed a lot of people." When it was pointed out to him he'd killed an Iraqi woman who was standing near a so-called militant, or rather someone opposed to his invasion, Schrumpf said, "I'm sorry, but the chick was in the way." In 2007, Apache helicopter pilots, keen to augment their body count, shoot a Reuters cameraman, driver, and several bystanders. "Look at those dead bastards," the New York Times records a pilot as saying. "Nice," the other replies as both revel in their kill. While the White House ignores the behavior of its own troops, insisting its spin doctors present them as heroic. A pilot in Iraq, Pilot Colonel Richard White, freely discloses that the U.S. bombing missions were a turkey shoot. "It's almost like you flipped on the light in the kitchen at night. The cockroaches start scurrying, and we're killing them." On his album, Relentless, Bill Hicks, the American comedian, would note, "It wasn't really a war. A war is when two armies are fighting." But long before the Gulf War, the U.S., a new Ahab in its Pentagon Pequod, has been invading country after country in its quest for the cheapest possible sources of oil. And woe betide anyone who comes between this hyperpower and its supply of lifeblood. Bomb, 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 a belligerent Senator McCain will urge as his recipe for Iran to protect the standing of his voracious plutocracy, where the better you live, the more oil you use. As Esso once advertised in the New Yorker, the genteel Bible of the comfortable two-car utopians that comprise America's privileged establishment. In a rare moment of realism from an Ohio congressman, exposing how this new hydrocarbon Ahab operates, Louis Stokes said, "If Kuwait produced bananas instead of oil, we wouldn't have 400,000 American troops there today." The single-minded inhumanity of U.S. oil mania was made clear when the Secretary of State was asked on television what she felt about the fact that 500,000 Iraqi children had died. Madeleine Albright replied that the price is worth it. Ali Abbas, a Baghdad chief, had both his arms blown off and lost 16 members of his family. Ali Abbas said his life had been better under Saddam Hussein, but the rocket that destroyed it kept U.S. cars on the road. A prisoner released from Abu Ghraib, the U.S. torture chamber used to suppress Iraqi dissent, noted that the U.S. was keen to use electricity on his genitals, yet it was unable to restore it to his city.